This is your economic review this morning. My name is Elijah Charles. Here again, we're joined by George. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Elijah. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Let's yet talk about the biggest headlines that you're waking up to this morning. Well, Kenya Power has now taken a U-turn on its earlier decision to not disclose the breakdown of charges in prepaid electricity tokens amid regulatory probe after the utility stopped providing the complete bills to consumers. Now, this means that consumers will now have an opportunity to interrogate the units vis-a-vis the amount of money they will be paying to the energy provider. Now, the power provider, who did not earlier on give an official statement behind the reduced disclosure on the electricity token receipts, had since a month ago been sending bills through to customers' phones without a breakdown of charges, which made it impossible for customers on the modal payment to verify their costs. Again, let's take a look at that data that we have for you this morning on the energy provider in the country. Now let's look at exactly what is the Kplc Net Income as we do know of it, because we're still waiting to see exactly what the performance is. And you could actually say that all the way from 2016, 2017, they have been dropping as well. Let's look at another data point that we have for you this morning as regards KPLC. Look at that. The KPLC financial strength and weakness indicators and that quick ratio is exactly what it is that we should be talking about as well, because it has been quite dropping. Even if you look at what their current ratio is as well, also has been dropping, and pretty much also less than 1 as well, because there's a talking point. Now, we do know that they've also posted the worst results in 16 years, because what we do know now is they're really trying to salvage what looks like a sinking ship. All right, George, what could be the reason behind this sort of play from Kenya Power to charge more?
Elijah, last time we were with you, we discussed Kenya Power and its loss-making streak this year.
Yes.
And the decrease in its bottom line, as it were.
Yes.
And I realized one of the major factors that we discussed was one, the inefficiencies that is built in from its power producers.
Yes.
That sometimes it is forced to take up power that it cannot be able to sell, and therefore it has to charge that cost to the consumer. Elijah, you remember earlier in 2019, LSK, see, that's the column where took KPLC to the courts because of their, I would want to call it, fraudulent bills, especially for prepaid bills. What KPLC was trying to do is trying to pass on the costs from its power producers to the consumers, which was not legal and very unethical, Elijah. So it is not a surprise that KPLC is trying to do such things, Elijah. I don't know, Elijah, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes, George, I can get you.
Yes. So I was telling you, if you look at the suppliers of electricity,
yes,
to KPLC,
yes,
we have KenGen, we have geothermal development, and we have independent power producers that supplies power to KPLC. Some of those contracts are worded in such a way that the power producers must be paid, irrespective of whether those the power they produce is consumed by KPLC and eventually by the consumer or not. So that power, that cost is eventually built into your cost of power, Elijah.
Yes.
That is one of the issues that KPLC has to address. Initially, KPLC used to give you a detailed bill that shows you what has gone where. Your consumption is this much, there is a fuel cost, and then there is the taxes and all that. But at some point, they decided to just give you a block figure, which is also not only illegal, but very unethical. I think KPLC must come out clean. And even if it is a monopoly, it must deal with its clients as honestly as possible, so that I know if I'm paying 5,000 shillings today in my electricity bills, what goes into that 5,000? It is not proper that you give me a bill that you cannot explain yourself. Remember, we also have, apart from the big power producers, we also have the independent power producers in this country, Elijah. And if you look at some of those contracts, Elijah, they are worded in such a way that they are to benefit the power producers as opposed to KPLC and eventually the consumer. So the power producer gets his fees irrespective of whether he evacuates that power to the national grid or not, as long as that contract is still valid. Those are some of the reasons that makes power in this country a bit too steep as compared to our neighbors. Another thing that I want to tell you, Elijah, is inefficiencies that are built into the power producers and eventually into KPLC, and that now goes eventually into our bills. Earlier in 2018, 2019, I think KPLC had very serious corruption allegations, Elijah, if you can remember. And some of those costs,
yes,
that some of those pilferages eventually find their way into the bills that you as an individual or you as a consumer eventually pays to KPLC, because KPLC must pay for it for the power that is eventually delivered to you. If there are money that are lost in between, then the consumer must bear the brunt. Remember, in Kenya, KPLC is still like a monopoly, and therefore you don't have options other than to rely on KPLC to supply your power, Elijah.
Yes. Now, we do know, George, that Kenya now is planning to sort of embark on direct sales of power to clients directly. Do you think that this is going to be the knockout punch for KPLC, which is struggling with its customers?
Elijah can tell you one thing for sure.
Yes.
That KPLC, in my analysis,
yes,
might end up where the former telecom ended up, because they have been a monopoly. They have refused to innovate. They have refused to improve their business.
Yes.
If we get 2 or 3 players in that industry, Elijah, then KPLC, if it doesn't change the way it's doing its business, then it's likely to end up where telecom went. Kengen is a public listed company, and therefore it has obligations to its shareholders and the other stakeholders. Kengen proposing to come into the market and sell power directly is a good thing. It's something that is welcome, so that at least we have a competition to KPLC. What happens to monopolies is that they take their clients for granted. They don't listen to the needs of their clients.
Yes.
But what baffles me is that KPLC, in as much as it is a monopoly, it is still making losses and still cannot return by the finances that it brings. Coming things so that we can have at least 2 or 3. In fact, for me, I would prefer to have at least 3, 4, or 5 players in the distribution of power, so that we can have choices. If KPLC doesn't deliver on this, then I have plan B. If Kenya doesn't meet my expectations, then I have another player to go to. I think that is the way we are supposed to comes in the 90s, and the only Kenyan Corporation was the only licensed player in that industry. But when it was opened up, that we've had in that industry, Elijah.
Pretty much, George. I would like us to move into the next issue that we have for you this morning, where data from the Central Bank of Kenya paints a grim reality of what has been a COVID-19 ravaged economy, as workers and businesses have defaulted on loans worth 53.9 billion since the onset of the coronavirus restrictions in March, which will translate to many of the defaulters ending in the wrong books of the Credit Reference Bureau CRBs from January. Now, the non-performing loan book, which has been a concern in the industry, saw non-performing loans jump to 3.9 billion in October from a low of 349.9 billion at the end of February, which represents the sharpest 8-month increase in recent history. Central Bank of Kenya Governor Dr. Patrick Njoroge noted this in his notes, and I quote, "NPL increases were noted in transport and communication, energy and water, tourism, restaurants and hotels and real estate sectors, mainly due to disruptions of the businesses." Now, that were partially offset by repayments and recoveries in trade, manufacturing, building and construction sectors. End quote. Fine. Let's start for crossover and see the data that we have for you on this region as well, because you will see that gross non-performing loans have kept on increasing. And I want to point out to Q1 of 2020. That's why the jump is. And we're waiting for Q2, which is also going to show you the same scenario, and Q3 as well, as we end to see exactly what that is as well, because that talking point should be from Q2, because that increase there did not pretty much stop as well. Let's look at another data point that we have for you this morning. That is in Kenya's banking sector loan performance. You would actually say that when we're talking about June 20th and June 19th as well, that is in June 2019 and June 2020, you will actually see that disparity as well in terms of the way in which loans have been performing as well. Look at that. The gross non-performing loans in June 2019 up to where we are in June 2020 is a big disparity. That is what the CBK governor is talking to you this morning. Now, George, for you, where you're seated this morning, what does this high jump in defaults mean now for the stability of the banking industry? Yes, and talk to me, George, knowing very well that the picture that we're getting from the CBK and Treasury is that, well, we are quite resilient. Nothing is wrong. We've been fine. Do you share that same sentiment?
Elijah, thank you. Though you're not very clear from the other end, but let me say this. If you look at the percentage of NPLs to the total loan book for the banking industry, that is between 5 years to 2019, that is 2014, 15, 16, 17, 19, the averages were standing at 8.5%. In fact, CBK recommends a maximum NPL ratio of not more than 5%, but 8.5% was not a very bad figure. Up to half year of 2020, the NPL ratio to the total loan book in the industry stood at 11.6%, a jump of almost 3 or 4 percentage points. That tells that the quality of the loan book in our industry has deteriorated by close to 3.5%, Elijah. But that was expected. In fact, for me, I expected figures. In fact, I expected the rate by maybe 5 or 10, so to speak. But 3.5% deterioration, I think, was expected. And the economic conditions in the country. By June of this year, that is the half year of this year, the banking industry in total had restructured almost 360 billion in terms of non-profit, in terms of loans restructured.
Yes.
The major industries that were affected, larger industry. Remember, I don't know tourism. I mean, tourism was badly hit. Education was badly hit. Agriculture maintained its position, not as badly hit as the other sectors. Manufacturing, but not as bad. And then, of course, we have the public sector that was not able to collect as much in terms of revenues. When you go bank to bank, especially for the top tier, the tier 1 banks, we have KCB that restructured almost 120 billion Kenya shillings in terms of loan. We have ABSA, that's the former Barclays Bank,
yes,
that restructured 8.3 billion. And then we have Stanchart, 22 billion, Diamond Trust, 40 billion, Coop Bank, 15 billion, Equity, 92 billion. And then the rest, which accounted for another 100 billion. So I think the bank industry gives us a pointer of where the economy is headed. or where the economy is. And therefore it's a pointer to an economy that's not doing very well. But on the backdrop of the pandemic, I think we are not badly off, Elijah, compared to our neighbors, first of all, and then compared to the global economy as it were. I think the challenge is from the banking industry now to look into the future and see what are the best ways to start now recovering from this pandemic as we go into 2021. So in a nutshell, Elijah, the industry depicts not a very rosy picture of our figures did not go as bad as some statistics had projected. So I think when we go into 2021, I think things will start picking up as the economy picks up going into 2021, 2022, Elijah.
Yes, therefore, lastly, George, on this, I mean, we have to talk about it every time we talk about the performance of the banking industry. Now, there's this big conversation. I mean, talk to me. When you look at these huge values in terms of defaulted loans, do you think that therefore come next year? I mean, well, the banks have taken this hit. They were positioned at a point where they were sort of going to carry the economy through the pandemic. Do you think that this is a bargaining chip for them to say, well, come next year, expensive credit, because we gotta take care of this defaulted loans?
I think, Elijah, if you look at the provisions of IFRS 9,
yes,
CBK, the Central Bank of Kenya has pushed banks to adopt. It requires that you provide 100% for any doubtful loans.
yes.
That doesn't mean that these loans will not be paid. Once you provide for them and you write them off your P&L or you suspend interest, then what the standard requires is that if you are able to recover these monies, then you simply write them back into your profit and loss accounts. So the write-offs of the provisions doesn't mean that the banks are not able to recover this money. I'll give you the example of the tourism sector. Most of them were not able to pay even a single cent in terms of loan repayments from the time this pandemic came into our country. But if things improve and they start going back into business, then they might be able to pay back some of these loans. So if this loan had been written off, then banks are allowed to write back these profits into their P&L. So going into 2021, 2022, you might start seeing a reduction in provisions for non-performing loans, and then you might start seeing a jump in the profit and loss, or the jump into the net profit before tax that is reported by some of these banks. So I think this year they took it, which is reasonable because we didn't know where the pandemic was going with us. But as we get to know more about this pandemic, as we get vaccines coming in, I think some of these loans will be written back into the revenue statement of some of these banks, Elijah.
Pretty much, George. Thank you very much for that explanation. With that note, I would like us to go for a very short break. Once we come back, we're still talking about the post-COVID-19 recovery strategy. Now, we do know there's a paper called the ERS, and if you have not seen it, then you should look for it. It's called the Economic Recovery Strategy, which is pretty much painting a picture of exactly how we are supposed to get back as an economy. Top of that, unemployment tax, but how are we going to get the money for COVID-19? We'll tell you exactly what Ukuri Yatani has in place as we ask the question, is that the best way out or just the only way out?